All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Health Transformation webinar. This is Kate Archibald speaking, and we got Reagan with us today to go over some amazing things on blood sugar and just how to take your health to a whole nother level. So really excited to go over this stuff today. Looks like we got a couple people trickling onto the webinar. So yeah, we're gonna have some awesome stuff going on today. So Reagan, let's take it away.
Okay, so hopefully you guys have been following the looking at getting your blood sugar corrected, transforming your overall health, and then many of you have come in and got testing ran. You've got treatments, stem cell procedures, and so today's going to build on a whole lot of what we've already covered, but we're going to dive in even deeper. So we're going to talk about why blood sugar is important and then how it works. I think it's really important for you guys to understand how blood sugar works if you're going to transform your health. We're going to talk about how to transition from a high carb to a low carb diet, or more like a ketogenic diet. We're going to show you how to choose the best foods for blood sugar transformation, how to cook your food, and then we'll give you an introduction to a well-rounded diet, and then how to sleep like a baby. This one's great. Or how to sleep like a king or a queen. And then the emotional connection with eating will be addressed too. So we've got a lot to cover today, but feel free to type in your questions. Anything, if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask us. But really happy to have you on. So let's jump in. So first of all, if you're looking at macronutrient ratios, so 3 macronutrients in your life: fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. And I'm not a big fan of counting calories or counting, the grams of fat that you're eating, for example. But I think it's important for you as you're changing your diet and really diving into some new nutritional patterns to just think about it a little differently. So a nutrient-dense diet, that's where you have 130 to 150 grams per day of healthy fats. And most of these, the high fats and low carbs is specific in the morning up until around 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Then you can start adding in a little more carbohydrates. Your last meal of the day is where you get your carbs. So eat all these fats. Your body does better with them in the later part of the morning and early afternoon. So 130 to 150 grams of fat. And you can have some proteins in the morning, but proteins can also be broken down and become sugars. We want you 20 to 100 grams, healthy grams of carbs, and then 100 to 150 healthy grams of protein. So we're not big advocates on eating a bunch of meat. This is not the Atkins diet. In order to get your body so it's a clean, lean burning machine, you've got to be using fat as your primary energy source. And that's going to help kick in different metabolic processes and stave off a lot of diseases. So here's some of the benefits of a fat-based diet. And here's a study that was done. They found in human subjects, a randomized controlled trial found that low carbohydrate diet induces a statistically significant improvement in mood compared to a low-fat intervention group. The low-carb dieters also experienced fewer mood swings and irritability. So many of you on the webinar today are super grumpy. No, I'm joking. You guys are all great. But if you're like, man, I want to see if I'm a little happier doing more of a fat-based diet, I would definitely recommend give it a try. It's been pretty amazing for me. I've been doing a ketogenic type diet, more of a fat-based. I don't want to call it ketogenic. I've done periods where I've been pretty extreme on ketogenic and stayed in ketosis and measured that, but I don't necessarily think that it's the smartest way to always live your life. And so that's why we call it a fat-based diet, is because this is where you get healthy fats in, and you also get healthy carbs, and you get healthy proteins. So yes, you're going to be in ketosis most of the time, but I don't want anyone to obsess about it. But I've been following this vein for about 4, maybe 5 years now. And it does take about a year for the cell membranes to start to transition so that you can use fat as an energy source instead of the preferred easy metabolic process, which is glucose. And we'll talk more about glucose in a minute, but give yourself time on this and see how you feel, see what it does to your brain, especially, because I think that's what a lot of our patients notice is suddenly their brain feels alert and alive. So here's another study. A lot of people get freaked out when I say, hey, we want you eating about 130 to 150 grams of fat in there. And they say, well, my doctor says I've got high triglycerides, I've got high cholesterol. He wants me on a low-fat diet. And here's a study, just to help put your mind at ease. A 2015 study found that the triglyceride to HDL ratio is the most significant independent marker of cardiovascular mortality. So look at your HDL ratio to your triglycerides, okay? If you have your blood work in front of you. If you haven't had blood work done in a while, give us a call. Let's get that going for you. In the study involving 374 high-risk heart patients, there was no significant relationship between total cholesterol and the extent of coronary disease. Additionally, there was an extremely significant statistical link from total triglycerides and the triglyceride HDL ratio. So that's really what you want to look at. The total cholesterol originally, before statins were designed or discovered, what happened is our markers, you could be 220 to 250, and your doctor would say, well, your cholesterol is getting a little high, but nothing to be concerned with yet. But then once statins came on the market and the pharmaceutical companies wanted to sell more of them, what happened is those statins, instead of the marker being, that your total cholesterol, it dropped to between 200 and 220. That's the high risk. And then they dropped it again between 180 and 220. And now your doctor wants your cholesterol numbers down to about 160. And there's a great doctor, his name's Dr. Sinatra. I can't remember his first name, but Dr. Sinatra has done a lot of research. He's written a book, I believe it's called The Cholesterol Myth.
Reagan, wasn't it Frank?
You wish. I know. That's why I can't remember his first name, because I'm always like, the only Sinatra it's been permanently ingrained is Frank Sinatra. But yeah, but he's done a lot of research, and he's found that if people have more episodes of depression, anxiety when cholesterol numbers drop that low, and dementia, because your brain, a quarter of your brain is cholesterol. So think about this. Look at your triglyceride to HDL ratio before you start jumping on any of those cholesterol medications. So here's the importance of cholesterol. If we had no cholesterol and removed it all, then we would melt and disappear. And remember, your liver makes 75%. Some research shows higher than that, 80% of your body's cholesterol. Your brain is made of fat and cholesterol. Remember, 25% of your brain is cholesterol. And it's crazy. And we are removing cholesterol as quickly as we can by getting on this low-fat diet. And then what that forces your liver to do is to produce more cholesterol. So we see actually the opposite of what conventional wisdom would tell you, which is get off the foods that have cholesterol in them, no eggs. And many of you remember Dwight Eisenhower. He had a massive heart attack. And so then they put him on a low-fat, low cholesterol diet, no eggs, dry toast. I mean, the whole works. And his cholesterol numbers actually shot up. They went higher because of this diet. And he was very sick when he left office. So here's another study. In a study of obese subjects, a sub 20, so below 20 grams of carbohydrate ketogenic diet decreased total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood glucose. In contrast, there was a significant increase in HDL. This study lasted 56 weeks, and health markers were consistent through 7 different tests at 8-week intervals. So if you are looking to lose weight, if you're looking at long-term health, 56 weeks is pretty good. That's over a year, and they saw phenomenal improvements in all the markers overall. So I think this is if you're looking at I want to go more fat-based, Reagan, but I don't want to blow out my adrenals, blow out my kidneys. I don't want to have any issues. The very first thing you have to do is get started on our liver detox. So if you do not have a copy of my book, Your Health Transformation, then let me know and we can send you a free digital copy, or you can go purchase it on Amazon, and it will be one of the best $14 investments of your life, or $12 or $16, somewhere in that range, whatever it costs on Amazon. But we're also happy to send you a free digital copy. And it will walk you through step by step on the liver's role in helping create an environment where you can actually start metabolizing fats more efficiently. So right out of the gates, we want you to avoid some foods that are going to provoke oxidative stress and keep you out of ketosis. So refined and added sugars. This is very dangerous. And that's what's nice on labels now, is you can see what added sugars there are in like some of the drinks you're doing. You want to avoid bleached refined flours, industrial plant oils, any artificial ingredients, and then the big five: the gluten, dairy, soy, corn, and peanuts. Now, some of you may say, well, I do fine on gluten, but the safest forms of gluten is like your sourdough bread. If you're a bread addict and you just can't quite get around not eating bread ever again in your life, well, try some fermented bread, some sourdough bread. It's the fermentation process partially digests some of the gluten. If you have severe intolerances, you got to stay away. If you have any autoimmune disease, you got to stay away from these. The whey protein in dairy is very beneficial. It's great for your gut lining if you've got leaky gut, if you've got any type of digestive issues. Whey protein is very stable. It stabilizes the digestive system, and that comes from dairy. But the casein is the big killer. Casein can be one of those things that causes inflammation. So, just make sure if you're eating dairy, avoid the milk, avoid any types of dairy that are not fermented. So like a plain yogurt, especially goat products. Goat has a different type of protein structure, so it's easier on your body than the cow dairy. So if you want to do some yogurt, then goat yogurt's preferred. I've really been enjoying my coconut yogurt. That's been awesome. Soy is great if it's fermented, like natto kinase. Natto is the fermentation, fermented soy, very sticky and goopy, kind of like snot. But I would, that would be the only way we'd recommend, eating soy. Corn, if you do some that's non-GMO here and there. And then peanuts have the aflatoxin. They harbor mycotoxins in your body, so we'd probably want you to avoid the peanuts as well. So let's talk about some of the things that you can do to really get an understanding on blood sugar. Because remember, if you're eating a carbohydrate low diet, then it's going to give your pancreas a break, because your pancreas is an organ that does better if it's not working all the time. And actually your entire body does better if you're not getting these massive spikes of insulin. So when you eat and load your body up with sugar, you actually cause massive inflammation. So it's called aging. So it's advanced glycation end products. So that's where age comes from. And aging is from too much sugar. When you put your pancreas in a threat mode where it has to produce all this insulin, then the beta cells start to die off when the glucose levels go too high. So very risky. But in a healthy pancreas, as you can see, the glucose finds the receptor sites on the cells, and the insulin carries the glucose into those receptor sites. Insulin finds its receptor, drops off glucose. Glucose gets transported by what are called GLUT4 transporters into the mitochondria of the cell, and then that's where the cell gets the energy. In type 1 diabetics, the problem is your body has glucose in it, but the pancreas does not produce insulin. Those beta cells are diseased, and so the glucose has a very difficult time making its way to those receptor sites on the cell. It can't get into the cell without insulin. And then in type 2, what happens is your insulin is still produced by your pancreas, but the insulin goes to carry glucose into the receptors. And the problem is that glucose, insulin drops it off, and then it goes to bind itself to the insulin receptor on the cell, but the glucose cannot get transported. So those GLUT4 transporters don't get the signal from insulin because those insulin receptors become resistant. Because most type 2 diabetes, it comes because we have not watched our diet enough, we're not exercising enough, all these things. So here's what happens if you eat too much sugar. Because why eating sugar and then taking insulin is toxic? Well, the first thing, like I mentioned before, is the high glucose is toxic to beta cells and it will destroy them. If you don't have beta cells, then you're not going to produce insulin. And if you're not producing insulin, then you can't transport the glucose into the cells for energy. So this is why diabetics, if you happen to be diabetic or know somebody who's diabetic, and you think, oh, I can just eat whatever I want and I'm going to be fine. Well, that's a myth. It's a lie you're telling yourself, and you're actually going to be destroying these beta cells. And I know far too many diabetics who say, well, my doctor is happy with my numbers. I've got my numbers, down to 6.8, and he says as long as it's below 7 in my hemoglobin A1C, then I'm fine. But they don't realize that then they go have that 64-ounce Coke, and that 64-ounce Coke, it's dumping so much glucose into their blood that it's killing more and more beta cells, which means they need more and more insulin just to help regulate the glucose in their blood. And so very dangerous. So you're killing off more and more beta cells, and your pancreas becomes harder and harder to heal. So this is something we want to look at. Here's what we found. Higher fasting. These are just some summaries from the research. Higher fasting blood glucose and hyperinsulinemia, consistently elevated insulin levels, much easier to say, have links to most chronic diseases. So, and many of you have heard me talk about the Kaiser study where they found any fasting glucose point. So if your fasting blood sugar is 84, or each point above 84, we want you to be between 70 and 80. That's the sweet spot in your fasting glucose. But what the Kaiser study found, that any point above 84 gives you a 6% greater chance of developing type 2 diabetes in the next 9 years. So 6%. And so if you multiply that, and let's say that you show up at 100, then you're like, oh, it's 160% chance that you're going to have diabetes in the next 9 years. Like, that's scary if you don't change things. So individuals, next one, individuals who have the highest serum concentration of insulin have a 62% increased risk of cancer mortality. So you may be using your insulin and thinking, well, I'm regulating my blood sugar. And the problem is your chance of having cancer is going up the more insulin you have in your body. And that can be insulin that from an endogenous source, something you create in your pancreas, or an exogenous source like your insulin medication. So hyperinsulinemia has links to increased cancer mortality independently of diabetes. In other words, high fasting blood sugar and insulin levels are damaging to everyone, whether diabetic or not. So it doesn't matter if you've got too much insulin because you've eaten too much sugar, it's going to damage your body. A large number of studies support the association between type 2 diabetes with cancer risk and mortality. So hopefully, if that was not enough to get you thinking about eating more of a fat-based diet, I don't know what could be. This is from diabesity journals. What they found is hyperinsulinemia may be a unifying theory of chronic disease, as it is involved in the pathway of most modern disease. So the very first place when you're looking to transform your health, first place you've got to start is regulating your blood sugar. And for many of us, myself included, that means you cannot cheat. And this is a 7-day-a-week process where you're constantly elevating. You're looking at how can you expand and increase your health versus I want to get away with the most possible treats and cheating as I can. We've got to start moving away from that, because we're just learning that eating some of these refined carbohydrates, or if you're eating too much protein can actually create a spike in blood sugar as well. And so that's where we need to start focusing on getting the right fats in our diet, especially in the morning when your cortisol levels are high. So one of the most important things that we look at in your cells and for the energy in your body is the mitochondria. If the mitochondria has a poor fuel source, it's like, how is your car going to run if you're dumping garbage fuel into it? It's not going to go, right, Kate? I mean, Kate, you have an electric car now, and how does your car run?
It runs amazing, and it's all on electricity.
Smooth, right? No gears to shift. It's just one even flow. And
love it.
and it happens to go 140 miles per hour, which is wild. So
it was a police officer driving.
Luckily, there was a police officer driving, but I'm sure you're going to try to beat his record.
I might. Watch out, everybody.
So if you look at the mitochondria, it's kind of like the difference between having a high-functioning electrical car that's just smooth. I mean, if you've ever driven an electrical car like a Tesla, they're very smooth, they're very fast and responsive, versus a gas-powered engine, which, yes, there are some gas-powered engines that are very, very smooth and very responsive and awesome cars. No question about that. But the analogy I'm using is a gas-powered car, you have a transmission, it's got to shift gears. It's like, zzz, zzz, zzz. Electrical car is just one nice continual flow of energy. And that's the difference between being on more of a fat-based energy source versus a sugar-based energy source. And so the thing that is essential is getting the mitochondria in your cells very healthy. So many of you know the difference between white fat and brown fat. So white fat is the metabolically inactive fat cells. Those fat cells are just hanging out, and they are what's giving you knee pain, joint pain, hip pain, and causing inflammation. They're just not great for you. What you want is more brown fat, because brown fat is where the mitochondria come to the surface of the cell. And mitochondria do literally, they'll change the color of that fat, and it will be more brown fat, which means it's more metabolically active. And so one of the best ways you can get more brown fat is cold showers or taking a cold plunge or a cold bath. Do that every single day. And interestingly enough, on the upper back, kind of your thoracic spine, that's where you're going to have the most receptors for transitioning that white fat to brown fat. So get in the cold shower. It's going to be huge. And then eat more of a fat-based diet. So here's what they found. Mitochondria play the role in creating 90% of the energy we need. They control apoptosis, cellular death. And so if one cell dies, then that cell, as it goes through its lysing process, what it does is it sends a signal to the other cells around it saying, this is an unhealthy environment, you should die too. And so if you have healthy mitochondria, then these cells are going to start growing, and they're going to send out signals of health. And so that's why it's really fascinating when we put stem cells in people's body, because those stem cells signal to all the other cells in your body, hey, there's plenty to live for. We got plenty of health. And so they send a signal to get the cells to start growing, and they send that signal right to the mitochondria so that you can have a healthier environment where those stem cells can thrive. So in particular, uncontrolled cell growth can lead to cancer. Modern research is showing that mitochondrial dysfunction is central to a range of chronic diseases. And so what triggers the mitochondrial dysfunction? Well, it's the foods, it's the source of energy that you're giving your mitochondria. So one of the easiest ways to start getting your mitochondria healthy and getting your body in a correct pattern where you're using fat as a fuel source is giving your pancreas breaks. And this is so important because you do not want that insulin just constantly being secreted into your blood. So this is what we want you to do, is time-restricted eating. And we've talked about this many times, is where you eat in an 8 to a 12-hour window. Time restriction means you cannot eat past 12. So if you wake up and you eat at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's when that first cup of coffee, the first thing goes in your mouth, whatever you do first thing in the morning. And then at 8 o'clock at night needs to be the very last thing that goes into your mouth at 8 o'clock at night. And so that's the largest time window that you can eat in. We recommend restricting it down to more like an 8-hour window, where maybe your first bite, the first thing that you eat comes at like 10 o'clock in the morning. The last thing you put in your mouth is 6 o'clock at night. That's pretty ideal schedule for me. I find between about 10 and 6 or 10 to 7 is where I try to hover. And that's actually, there's research that shows it improves endurance, muscle mass, but it's one of the best things you can do to balance your blood sugar out. The best thing to do to keep in this pattern is stay hydrated. So one thing that does not wake up your liver and wake up all the metabolic processes is having some sea salt or other minerals like magnesium first thing in the morning. So I love using like the Calm. Use a scoop of Calm, which is magnesium. Or I'll use Natural Stacks. Their new one is the MagTech. So it's got all 3 kinds of magnesium. And then I'll put about a gram of sea salt in my water before my workout. And then I'll just drink those minerals in the morning instead of just straight water. You can do straight water too. You can put lemon in your water. That's fine. But stay hydrated. It's the most important thing you can do. And especially when you wake up in the morning, if you're hungry, a lot of times your body is just telling you it's thirsty because you've lost a pound of hydration overnight. And then relaxing, making sure that if you're in a time-restricted eating window, I find it so much easier at night just to sit down and relax. You grab a book, you can, write in your journal, you can do your gratitude. It's much easier to relax when you're not thinking, maybe I'll have a little more dessert, or I'm going to eat those crackers, So time-restricted eating is one of the best places to start by adapting over into more of a ketogenic diet. So primary way that your body, that ketogenesis happens is restricting your carb intake to a maximum of around 50 grams per day. Now remember, we're not big on focusing on getting you in ketosis. That's not the goal. It's not the goal of a health transformation. But if you're eating 50 to 100 healthy grams of carbohydrates today and you're exercising, even if you go over 50 grams, you're going to stay in ketosis the majority of the time. And what really matters is when you eat the carbohydrates. So ideally, you're eating the carbohydrates later at night. You're going to sleep better if you're eating your carbs at night, and you'll feel better too. So healthy liver is going to be necessary because the liver is what converts those fatty acids into ketones, and then the ketones get transported through your blood vessels right into your brain. So it's like, once again, it's that electrical versus gas-powered engine. Which do you want? You also want a healthy pancreas, and that's going to allow you to produce more ketones. The brain is able to use ketone bodies as a replacement fuel for glucose. And then make sure you get hydration and plenty of vegetables. I see people, the worst thing I see people do on a ketogenic diet is they're so worried about keeping their carbohydrates restricted that they don't eat vegetables. And that is going to create a plugged up liver, and you're not going to get any benefits from a ketogenic type diet or a fat-based diet if you don't have a healthy liver. So hopefully this is a good start. We'll pick up on this next week. Feel free to share this with your friends. We're going to publish it to YouTube in the next couple days, and can't wait to have you on the next show.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reagan. And thank you guys for attending, and everybody have a wonderful day.